Good morning, and we'll stretch into good afternoon. My name is Madeline McAfee. I've been a volunteer for People's Resource Center for about 9 years, teaching computer classes and also doing some other things with PRC. I worked for Motorola for about 30 plus years, so I have had a lot of experience with using Excel, and happy that you were able to make it today to learn about pivot tables. Feel free to stop me at any time to ask questions, okay? There's no such thing as a dumb question. So if you don't understand it, then somebody else probably doesn't get it either, and I appreciate you asking any questions. So, okay, so what is a pivot table? It's a tool that's built into Excel for data analysis, okay? And it's a very powerful tool for analyzing lots of data, whether that data is, have a lot of different columns, a lot of different variables, or just a lot of different sums and numbers, it can help you analyze a lot of that data. There's two different types of tools under the pivot table category. One is pivot tables, and the other one is pivot charts, and we'll get into show you both of those. And why are they called pivot tables? Well, the word pivot is used because it's very easy using this tool to change the way you're looking at the data, whether you want to analyze one variable versus another variable, or maybe switch them and analyze them a different way, or look at two variables versus one variable. And you'll see as we get into it how that pivot word comes into play. So how are they used? Used very often in business for analyzing large amounts of numerical data. In my experience, we used them a lot for analyzing sales data. It might be sales data with different salespersons, by different sales regions, by manufacturing part numbers. So anytime you got a lot of data with some numbers associated with them, it's a great way to analyze and to answer questions that maybe your management needs to know about the data. You can also use it to analyze data. Maybe they just hand you a bunch of data, you don't really know what you're looking at, and you have no specific questions that you've been asked to answer. But by looking at the data in a lot of different ways, you may be able to find some trends that lead you to make better decisions about, maybe what region to invest advertising in, for example, if you're looking at sales data, or which salesperson has the best track record, and maybe we can learn more about how they're being successful, those kinds of things. So it's not just to answer questions, but it's also just to kind of mine the data for information that might be valuable to your business, or to your group, or your organization, whatever. You can use a pivot chart to graphically analyze the data. You've heard, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, that's very true when it comes to data. So the pivot chart in some cases can be a very powerful tool. If you have too many columns and too much data in terms of variables, the pivot chart may have limited use, because graphically we can only generally show maybe 3 dimensions. So if you have a lot more variables than that, a table is usually a way to go. Or limit the number of variables that you're looking at until you can fit it into a chart that's meaningful. All right, any questions? No? All right. Okay, some of the requirements on the data. The requirements are the same as if you were using the data type tools within Excel. First of all, you have to have column headers in the top row. Each row of data should be a unique record. So all of the data in one row should be related to each other. For example, maybe it's a specific sales transaction with the name of the salesperson and the quantity and the item number or whatever. But all of that, each record should be related to each other and represent one transaction. Each column of data, and again we'll look at some data here in just a second, each column of data should be a similar type of information. In other words, it's all this is the part number, or this is the salesperson number, or this is the date, or this is the quantity. You don't want any blank rows in your data. You don't want any blank columns in your data. It should all be what we call contiguous. In other words, once you click into the data, the spreadsheet portion of the data, there's no emptiness there. So the pivot table will capture all of the data there. Let's see. It's recommended if you have data or sets of data that has blanks, that you use zeros instead of blanks, again, just to kind of make it a little bit cleaner.
If you don't remember to put zeros in a table, does it automatically, in some sense, tell you that the square is blank and we can't do whatever it's next?
If it's a value, it will assume. I believe it assumes that it's 0. So if it's doing a sum and the value is 0, I think it will assume a 0 for the sum. You can get into problems if you're trying to do averages, though. Okay. Because Excel, when you do averages, doesn't necessarily like blank spaces.
Okay, so like
but
you forgot to put something in that square that you know, in the process of key punching or that.
Yeah.
That's what
it's just, okay. It's right. Wise to make sure it's filled.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just.
So if the column goes down and that you kind of inadvertently left an empty space, and you're asking for an average or something, and you still have other numbers at the bottom, but beneath that empty space, the average would it come up with an average just up until that space?
No, if it's just a single empty space, all of the data will still be included in the pivot table. If you have a complete empty row or a complete empty column, then the pivot table won't pick up everything outside those empty columns. Okay. So a single individual empty space is not going to keep it from analyzing the rest of the data. But if it may not analyze it correctly, if, for example, you're using the average function or something. Okay? Good questions. Okay, so let's look. This is a sample set of data, and we're going to go through this live, but I thought we'll go through it on PowerPoint first. So this set of data is just some student school scores. So we have months, we have a number of different subjects, we have 2 students, Elisa and Mary, and then we have a bunch of scores. Okay? So you can see from here that, one, we meet all the data requirements. We've got column headers here in the top row, and it looks like there's no empty spaces or empty rows. Once you click inside the data, Excel will recognize that there is a set of data here, and it will highlight the entire section there as you go, and you go to the Insert tab and choose Pivot Table, and again choose Pivot Table under that. Okay, and again we'll go through this live too. But the first thing that pops up then is this screen, and you notice a couple things. First of all, you've got a new selection on the ribbon here called Pivot Table Tools, and there's 2 tabs under Pivot Table Tools. You see what's called a Pivot Table Report over here. Right now it's just kind of an icon. There's nothing there, but we're going to build that, and that's where, as we start building the pivot table, that's where your actual Pivot Table Report is going to appear. You get a box called the Pivot Table List. And there's 2 parts of it. One is the fields, and this came from the data that we used. So there's 4 fields that we had in there: the month, the subject, the student, and the score. And right now they're all empty checkboxes. So this will change depending on what data that you use. This part at the bottom will always be the same, and this represents. Lets you choose where you want to put the various variables into the pivot table. Okay? So and I'll talk a little bit more about these 4 different areas. The other thing is when I created this, you have an option of creating the pivot table in the worksheet where your data is, or in a new worksheet. In this case, my previous worksheet was, my data was in a sheet called data. And when I created the pivot table, I told it to create it in a new sheet. So it's actually, the pivot table is in sheet 2, where my data is still there on the tab called, on the worksheet called data. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about these 4 areas. You can choose your data in rows, columns. You can add a filter, and then your actual values go in here. So let's see. So the value portion of the report that I showed you is where the actual numerical data goes. In this case, it's the scores, the test scores, or the grades, the score that each of the students received. And in this area, this is where all your calculations will be done, whether it's a sum or an average or choosing or counts, min, max. So those are the types of calculations that can be done in the pivot table. The filter is an area where you can filter out portions of the data. And then the rows and columns are pretty self-explanatory. You choose the rows for the titles or the fields that you want to be listed on the rows. And you choose columns for the labels that you want to be, the fields that you want to be listed across the column headers. Yes?
Can you have more than 4 elements?
Yes, you can. Yep, and we'll see that in just a second. Okay. So let's start creating our table. In this case, so I've checked all 4 of the fields here, and then they get populated down in this area below. And Excel will try to make some intelligent decisions about where you want it. For example, if I just clicked on score, it would see that those are numbers, and that it belongs down in this values area. Other things, it doesn't really know how you want it portrayed. It's going to put them somewhere, and you can move them around after they've been populated down here. But in this case, we have column labels as the subjects, or the subjects in the column labels. So you can see on our pivot table here, we have across the column labels in the pivot table report, we have the different subjects. And then down in the row labels, we have 2 down here. So we have the student names are row labels, and then underneath each student, we have the months. Okay? So we've got student and month. And depending on which order these are down here, determines what the outermost first label is. Okay? So I've got student as the first one here. So Elisa and Mary are the farthest out ones, and then month is kind of a category inside that. All right? And you can flip those around. Okay, so what I did this time is I changed these, okay? I moved student from down here. I just did a drag and drop. So now my column labels are student. And now I have subjects as my row headers, with the months still down here in the row area. Okay?
Hey Madeline, what does that bottom thing, defer layout update, mean?
That's a great question. So if you have a very big pivot spreadsheet with a lot of data, and you may have a lot of different variables that are going on in these different areas, if every time you drag one of these things over, it tries to update the entire pivot table. And if you've got a huge table, it can take some time to do that. So if you have a bunch of changes you're going to make, you don't necessarily want it updating after each drag and drop. You want to wait till you get it in its new form that you want to analyze, and then have it do the update. So what you want to do then is you would check it and just say defer the layout update, make all the changes that you want. It won't try to update it as you're making the changes, and then you click the refresh button here, and then it will analyze all those changes at once. Okay? Good question.
In your history, I mean, can that take like minutes or hours or?
No, not that big. It's still seconds,
Okay.
but and again, it depends on how big your spreadsheet is.
Thank you.
But even, if you're trying to do something, even if waiting 5 seconds or something between all these updates can be kind of annoying, right? This is still the same set of data. And this time what I did is I moved month, which had been down as one of the row labels, I moved it up to the report filter. So now you see kind of a new area that we didn't have before, which is the filter up at the very top of the spreadsheet. And in this case, I'm filtering just on the month of March. So the data it's presented to me is just a single month of March. Okay? And you can, in this drop-down filter, you can choose multiple months. You could choose them all. You could choose January, February, or just February, or whatever. So just like a normal filter in Excel. Okay, and we'll see that. Okay, so just one quick on charts, and we can go through this. But you create a chart in very similar way. You would open up and I didn't make screenshots of all of these different steps, but it's really the same steps. You would start with highlighting the data, selecting the data that you want, and then on that Insert tab, let me go back to on this Insert tab, you would choose Pivot Chart instead of Pivot Table. You would get a screen similar to this, but not exactly. You would, instead of this report, you'd see a chart that's kind of blank. And then you would basically drag and place the variables where you want to in the chart. So in this case, I chose to have months along the horizontal axis. Okay, and that's pretty typical that if you have any time variable, it's usually very typical to show it across the horizontal axis. We have the data shown vertically. So these are the scores on the vertical axis. And then we have the two students. And in this case on the chart, we're showing Elisa in blue and Mary in red. And we have a filter up here, which are the different subjects. So in this case, we're looking at a single subject of history. So you can see that Elisa has one, she has an increasing trend, and she's significantly better than Mary. So graphically, it just kind of pops that data at you, right? Okay, we can look some more of that when we go live. All right, any questions? Yeah.
So it wouldn't be that much different to show the same stuff at the same time for like the English and the other subjects as well? Or would that be a separate chart in itself? Because we're just showing the one. What about the other three?
Well, you could choose, using the filter, you could choose to show a different one just by changing the filter.
Okay.
And then if you wanted to show more than one, and we can try that,
Okay.
you would have to somehow create a three-dimensional graph, right?
Okay, because that's what I thought.
Yeah. So we'll take a look at that. All right. Let me go to Excel now. Okay. So on each of your desktops, you should have a file folder called Pivot Table Practice Files. So go ahead and open the one that's called 2.7 Pivot Table Data -1. Okay, everybody good? All right, so let's take a look. First of all, does yours look like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Does that look like it meets the data requirements?
Yes.
Okay, let's click on it. Press Insert and go to, oops, sorry, let's do this. Choose Pivot Table. It's got our selected range, and we're going to choose New Worksheet right here,
Okay, this one is selected.
and then press OK.
Yeah.
give us a.
Monk, you got an error, right?
Right.
Right, and it says we don't have a field name that we're missing, right? So if you look over here, column C, we have a field name that's
We're
missing.
missing something.
Right. So let's cancel out of that.
Cancel out of this, and we have to put a name, a
Right.
label on this.
So and so in C1 you want to type the name student, or type the word student. Okay, so let's try that again. We're going to click within our data, go to pivot table. Same way, it's highlighting. You can see the little racetrack around the data. We're going to choose
Oh, yeah.
new worksheet again, and then click OK. Okay, everybody got a screen that looks like this?
Yes, we do.
All right. So that pivot table field list that I showed on the screenshots is kind of over here on the right-hand side. Before I had dragged it over just to make the screens a little bit smaller, and this is where our data is going to start showing up. Okay. So let's first just click. We're just going to click on one of these things at a time. So let's click on month. And you see it's starting to build our pivot table, right? It put months down in the as the row headers, right?
Row labels.
Row labels, correct. Okay, so let's click on another one. Let's click on student. I'm sorry, subject is next. So it added that. So it's now, you see it's down here in the row label section. And it's month is the first one and subject is the second. So month is like the primary sort with the subjects underneath it. Now let's click on student. And it added student. Now everything's all in as row headers, right? Which doesn't really look very good. But we'll come back and fix that. Well, actually, let's fix that right now. Let's drag the month and drag that over under column labels. All right, everybody get that drag and drop? And finally, let's click on score. All right, and score, it recognizes the score as data, so it automatically put that down here in this values box. Okay? So now you see we have a pivot table. So you just did your first pivot table, not bad. So we've got the months across the top as our column headers, and we've got subjects and the student down on as the row labels. Okay?
Why is January way off to the left there?
Good question. So in column B here, you see that there's also this word called column labels, and it just tells you that this area is column labels. So it's over there because it's left-hand justified, and this column is wider just because that word is there.
So you can't
Okay.
write justify it or?
Oh, you could. Yep, you can. So you can do a couple things.
How would we do that?
Okay, just give me 1 second. So you notice that we also have the row labels here. So those are kind of obvious. You don't necessarily need those, although it allows you to do some filtering. But there's a button over here,
Yeah.
top right, where you can just click that, and those row labels and column labels will go away. It's called field headers. It's under the pivot table options, the very far right button. And what it does is it just toggles these column labels and row labels. It just toggles them on and off. Again, those can come in handy if you want to do some filtering on those labels. But so let's leave them on for right now. Okay. Okay. So let me show you one other thing. If I click anywhere out here in the white area, my pivot table field list goes away.
Exactly.
Okay. If I want to get it back, just click anywhere inside your pivot table again, and it comes back. And your pivot table toolbar comes back. Okay? So if you're ever like, hey, what happened? I don't know what happened. It's all gone. I can't get back to it. Just click inside the pivot table, and you get all of the tools available, and you get your pivot table list again. All right? Okay, so let's take a look at how easy it is to change these things. First of all, maybe we want to list the student in front of the subject. So we'll just, within the row label box down here, we're just going to grab the subject, drag it down, and drop it below the word student. So I've just flipped these two upside down. Okay? And now in our pivot table, we see the students first with each of the subjects, and then the second student in each of the subjects. Okay? See how easy that is?
Yes.
All right. So we also talked about, so let's bring subject up into the column labels. So now I have student down in the row label, and subject month and subject in the column label. Okay? So you can see how that changes everything. And then,
I don't like it.
no, that's not a particularly nice format, but it was a step. Okay, now I want to move month from column labels over to report filter. Okay, so now I've got month in the report filter, subject as my columns, and then students as my two rows. And that's a pretty clean looking representation of the data, right?
Yes.
Not too many.
But there's
And-
no month showing in
Bless you.
Thank you.
So and now if you can, we can click on this report filter button, drop down. And right now it's showing all of the data. So it's all the data from January, February, and March, all summed together. Okay, so if I click on the little drop down, it opens up this flap. You see a little box down below that says multiple items.
Yes.
So I'm going to click on that. And now you see I have a little checkbox in front of each of the months. So I'm going to uncheck all, and then I'm just going to check January. And then click OK. So now it says, okay, this is for the month of January. I can see my scores just for January.
Yeah.
If you only click one, now if I want to go and look at January and February, so now I've got checks in front of January and February, but not in front of March. And then I click OK. Now you see on here, I can't see exactly what I have. I have to actually look at the filter to see what I have. But I know I've got multiple things selected. But now I'm going to be looking at the sum of the data for January and February together. All right? So let's go back. Let's just go back and choose all.
All right.
So we'll be looking at the sum of all the data again and click OK. Now I want to show you what some of these other row and column label filters can do. So let's say if we click on the drop down now for column labels, right now all of the subjects are shown. Maybe I just really want to focus on math and science and see how they're doing in the math and science categories. So I'm going to uncheck everything except math and science.
For the math, the science.
I want to leave math and science checked and uncheck the other ones.
Got it?
Okay? And then click OK.
Okay.
So now you see it's just all of that data, other data has been filtered out, and now I'm only showing the scores for math and science. Okay? And similarly, if you go to the row labels, let's say I really want to focus on Elisa. So I'll uncheck Mary. Uncheck Mary, leave Elisa checked. And then we'll click OK. So now I'm just showing Elisa's data for the two subjects that we have filtered. Okay? So you can see how much, I mean, this is a relatively simple spreadsheet, but you can see the amount of flexibility you have to show certain portions of the data without showing other portions of the data, till you get down to a manageable set of data that gives you some information that you want. So let's go back and let's go select all for the labels, so the row labels, and let's go back and select all for the column labels. Okay, another interesting thing about pivot tables is you can go into any specific cell. If I click on any one of the cells in my data, I can double click on it, and it tells me what makes up that cell. It actually puts it on a separate little worksheet, opens up a new worksheet. It says, here's the data that made up that number in my pivot table, which was 208. So if I add 71 and 65 and 72, that adds up to 208. So it just gives you an opportunity to look at any given cell in your pivot table, and it shows you where that data came from, what added up to get to that number. Okay? All right. So go back to your sheet 2, which should have your pivot table in it. Everybody back to this?
How do you get back to that?
So what we've got so far is the sum of all the scores. And let's look at some, instead we'll look at some averages, okay? So if we go to the sum of score box down here at the bottom right, and we're going to click on that little drop down arrow, and you see a line that says value field settings. Okay, we're going to click on that.
Okay.
Right. So and you see a box that opens up, and it says right now we're using the sum function. Now we're going to instead we're going to choose average. All right, everybody got that? All right, and just go ahead and click OK. So now it's showing you their average scores for each of the subjects. And again, this is summed over all 3 months. Now, that format doesn't look particularly nice, does it? Got all those extra digits. So we're going to go back to that same box. We're going to go back to this bottom right-hand number. Use the drop-down arrow.
Okay.
Go to Value Field Settings. And in the bottom left-hand corner of that pop-up screen, there's a box that says Number Format. So click on that. And we're going to choose the number category, the second one down instead of general. And we're going to choose, when it pops this box, we're going to choose 0 decimal places.
Okay.
And then click OK. And then click OK again.
Oh,
All right?
nice.
So that cleaned it all up, right?
Yes.
So we don't have all those decimal points. All right? So it just shows you how you can use, now instead of just looking at sums, you can use the averages or counts. In this particular case, count isn't going to be very interesting because they all have the same number of scores. But you can look at the average or sum. Okay? And you also see how to format the data. Now, we were going down here to get to that data. As usual in Excel, there's multiple ways to get to almost any given function. So the other place where you can get to these field settings is up here on the ribbon. So if you click on that, you see you get that same dialog box that pops up.
Which one?
Is there a reason why these three, I guess, buttons, the far right, why they're in yellow, beige?
They're turned on right now.
Yeah.
So if you if we click on this field list, you see that the field list field goes away, and then it's white. Okay? And the field headers, where we said with these column labels and row labels, if you want to turn those off, you can turn those
And
off.
what's the middle one do?
The middle one are the like sum and the expand and collapse buttons. We don't see those right now because we've kind of already collapsed the data in a way. So let's turn them all back on, and we'll go to, let's move the month from the report filter. Let's move it down as a row label.
Underneath student?
Underneath student, correct. Okay, so now you can see the little dashes out here next to the student names. So if those are expand and collapse. So if I click on that little dashed line, it collapses Elisa. So all those months are summed up, and you don't see the months anymore. Same if I collapse Mary, then I'm back to just two lines, Elisa and Mary.
Which one is that?
These little things here, if you click on these,
We didn't have a format before where you could see any of the pluses or minuses. So when we clicked on that plus minus button, it didn't show anything. But now you can see the plus minus buttons. So now if I click that, you'll see that those buttons will go away. Now it turns to white, and you don't see the collapse, expand, collapse, plus minus buttons.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to expand it, you need to turn those buttons back on, and then you can see the plus minus buttons again.
All right.
Okay?
all right.
All right.
I see. All right.
Okay, so let's do a pivot chart while you got this data up. So let's go back to our data.
Data.
Okay, the data sheet in your workbook. Okay, everybody got this? All right, we're gonna click in it. We're gonna go to the Insert tab,
That's right. All right.
and we're under the Pivot Table drop down. Now we're gonna click on Pivot Chart. All right, and so we get this option. We want to put it in a new worksheet again. Okay. So now, because we're gonna build our charts pretty much the same way as we built our table before. So let's choose month first of all,
All right. Put it.
and we want that to be along our axis. And then let's choose subject, and it put it down in the axis fields,
Yeah.
but I want to move that up to report filter. So drag it from this axis fields up to the report filter box. Okay. Let's choose student next. And it put it down in the axis field. I want to move that over to the legend field. And now you see there's a chart kind of starting to take place. And then lastly, we'll click on the score, and it automatically put the score down in our values area here, right?
Yes.
So it created a chart. So you see now, this is similar to the one I showed in the PowerPoint. It's got your months along the horizontal axis. It's got your scores, sum of scores on the vertical axis. And it's got a legend that has the two student names, right? And the subjects are is in the report filter. So right now you can see that you're looking at the sum of all the subjects. So if we want to look at an individual subject, so let's look at history. So I'm going to the report filter up in this top box, and I'm just going to choose the word history,
Show page.
and then click OK. Yep. So everybody get a chart that looks like this? So you can see in history, Elisa's a better student and actually is also showing an improving trend over the 3 months, right? Mary's also showing an improving trend, but is significantly below Elisa, right? So let's see, let's choose another subject. Let's pick science. So in science, you can see, well, there's not really there's no real trend here. They're kind of all over the map over the course of the 3 months.
And could we have more than one subject showing?
Yeah. So let's see what happens when we do that. So if we go back to this filtering box, we have to click the box that says select multiple entries or multiple items. And then you have then you get the little check boxes in front of them. So let's look at math and science. Okay, we'll just look at 2. And click. And now it's summed the 2. So you don't see them individually, it's summing the 2. Okay, any questions on the graph? So you can, again, you could pivot these around also if we move things around. So if we move subject to the column labels, now you have, now you can see Elisa in math and science and Mary in math and science. Okay. So does that kind of help what you were, yeah.
And these are actual values.
These are the individual values then in this case, yep.
And you just kind of move things around until you get the chart you want.
Exactly, depending on what you want to look for. Right? Yep, that's the beauty of pivot tables. The next example is a much more complicated spreadsheet. So are we ready to kind of move into the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's close. You can either leave it open or close it. I'm going to close mine just so I. And you want to open up in that same folder. There's a file called 2.7 pivot table data-2. All right, everybody got this up here? Okay, so this is looks like I got a bunch of column headers, and it looks like it's a pretty long spreadsheet. There's like let's see, 419 rows.
Wow.
So this is some real manufacturing data or some real financial data, I should say. So let's look at what we've got. We've got a number of manufacturers. In this case, they're all food companies. We have invoice numbers, which is kind of an alphanumeric type of number. We have a number of clients, client A, B, C, I think all the way through, I don't remember, EF or something. We have a balance due, so this is actually a dollar amount that's due in rebates. We have some other columns, monthly or quarterly. We have an invoice month, so the month of the year. We have what year the rebate was due. We have some kind of manufacturing part numbers and a payment frequency, which is whether we pay them monthly or quarterly.
What's that little corner piece under invoice?
This?
month?
That's just Excel's indication that if you hover it over it, it shows you, whoops, numbers stored as text. Okay? So it looks like a number, but it's actually saved in there as text. So it's not a number that you're going to be doing any kind of calculations on. Okay? Good question. So the story behind this is in your module. I'll just read it really quickly. You've been hired by XYZ Consulting Company. The position you've accepted has been vacant for over 6 months. Part of your new duties will be to handle the client rebate payments. The company bills, collects, and pays its client rebates for food purchases. The manufacturers are billed either monthly or quarterly, and it will be your job to invoice and collect the rebates and pay the clients on a timely basis. Some of the clients have complained that many of their rebates are long past due. Your manager has asked that you begin by concentrating on a collection of all the oldest items dating back to 2011. Okay, so this was actually a real-world scenario. This was Rebecca Bennett put this module together, and this was came into a job and they dumped this mess on her lap and said, figure it out and get us all caught up on paying our rebate invoices. So that's where this data came from. So we're going to walk through and create a pivot table. So first, let's just click anywhere inside the data. And then you're going to go to your Insert tab on your ribbon. And we're going to create a pivot table. All right, so again, you get the little Create Pivot Table box. Our range is highlighted here, and we want to put it in a new worksheet again. So get that. But let's click OK. Then you should get your pivot table form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're going to start building this up. What we want to know is, to answer some of the questions, we want to include the manufacturer's name. And that's going to be in the row label area. We want the invoice number, because we're going to have to pay all these invoices off. So we want to make sure we have the invoice number. And you see then it's starting to fill out our pivot table. We've got the different manufacturer's name. And then under each manufacturer, we've got the invoice numbers. Okay. We want to know our clients. Now our clients, put it in the row, but we're going to want to move that over to the columns. Okay, so you're going to drag and drop client from the row label box over to the column label box. Everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
Good, all right. So now we can see you've got client A, B, C, D, E across the column labels. And then we want the balance due, which is the amount we owe these folks. We're going to check that, and it's going to end up down in the values field down here area, right? Okay, so now we've got a table. It shows the balance due each of these clients. There's a total out here at the far right, and if we scroll down. Oops. You'll see that we also have a grand total across the bottom that we owe each of the different clients. Since these are dollars, let's do some formatting first. So we want to format the data. So we're going to go to use this field settings here on the ribbon. And we want to leave some, but we want to click on that box that says number format. And this time we're going to choose currency. And we're going to leave it, so we're going to have the dollar symbol in front of it, and we're going to leave it with 2 decimal points. Okay? 2 decimal places after the. And then we're going to click OK. And then we just click OK again. So we're going to add one more thing into our report here.
Okay.
And we're going to click on year.
Yeah.
Okay?
And put that letter.
And we want to put it in the report filter box. So in mine it showed up in the values, but I don't want it in values. I'm going to drag it over and put it in the report filter.
Okay. Got it.
All right, so we've got year here in the report filter box. Everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
Good? All right.
Oh, there.
So now you see that up here in the very first row of the spreadsheet, we've got the year filter. And since our boss asked us to focus on the oldest invoices first, we're going to choose 2011. So there's 2 years included in our data. We're going to choose just 2011. and click OK.
Okay.
All right. So now we've got, these are the oldest ones. These are the invoices that date back to 2011. We've got it by food manufacturer. We know exactly how much each client is owed.
How come it doesn't show the year though?
Not in the pivot table, no. This is a filter that's used, but you can see in cell B1, it says 2011.
Oh, yes, it does.
But if I printed it out, it would show the year.
It would show exactly what you see on the screen. If you, okay, and then there's a grand total at the bottom. So it says, oh, this company owes, $3,015 in rebates that are, that age back to 2011. So they want to go focus on those, get them paid off to all these different companies. And so one other thing, and we're just about running out of time, but I did want to show you, go to under your pivot table tools, there's another tab up there. We've been using all these tabs that are in the options category, but go to the design tab, and you see that you've got a lot of ways of kind of dressing up the way the pivot table looks with some color. If you click on this little drop down arrow at the far right of this pivot table styles group, choose one of these that you think looks like it's a nice format. Let's see. Yeah, I don't like this. So it kind of just highlights, each manufacturer, the individual invoices underneath it, the sum for each manufacturer is highlighted in a line, and it's bolded. It just makes it a little bit easier to read. So you can play around with the formatting. Okay, any questions? That's pretty much all I wanted to cover. This is really an introduction. You can dive a lot more into pivot tables, but I think the message is there's nothing there to be scared of. I think a lot of people, when they hear pivot tables, like, oh my God, I don't know how to do pivot tables. Well, now you do. It's not that complicated. Most of it is kind of knowing the basics of how to use it, and then being able to move the data around till you get something that is meaningful to you in terms of how the data looks or what questions you're trying to answer. Any questions?
So it seems like there's a lot of trial and error just to learn where to put each criteria in a different one of the 4 boxes.
Yeah, I mean, when you first start doing it, it's trial and error. I think once you get an idea, have used it a little bit more and get an idea of what your data looks like, you start to kind of know, well, I want my months along your column headers, for example, or it's experience really. But it can be the first time you go in and try to attack a problem. Yes, it's a lot of trial and error. The good news is it's really easy to do different trials to see what they look like, to see what makes sense. Just moving it around. Okay, any other questions? Great. Well, thanks so much for coming. I appreciate your attendance.